After a busy day yesterday, I've lost track of life, Tom. Yep. But before we get started today, I think it's always important to pause and give honor where honor's due. Is there a birthday here today? Doesn't Bethany have a birthday today?
Are we singing? I think we should.
Do you want to sing? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Bethany. Happy birthday to you. Yay. Happy birthday. And we're going to introduce your birthday present as you get to set through budget hearings.
It's going to be great.
Yes. Go ahead, Tom.
Just real quick before Sheena gets started, this is a qualifier. This is a compensation workshop. This is HR's diligence and weeks and weeks and weeks of work to put together what is a proposal for a compensation package for 2025. I want to put a qualifier on this for anybody watching, for anybody in the room. This is a recommendation. We don't know if we can afford this. We have to factor in all budgetary kinds of contemplations and decisions. This is a recommendation going forward. It is not a for sure promise that we're going to roll forward with this, but it is the best diligent work from HR on how we should move forward. So this is my qualifier.
There.
With that, Sheena, I'll turn it over to you.
Good morning, Sheena.
Great. Well, thank you and good morning. As Tom said, this is our presentation and recommendation moving forward. I first want to recognize the staff that has worked so hard to put our compensation recommendation together. So Anna Meyerhoff-Cole, of course, Bethany Corral, Lorian and Lindsay over in finance have really worked with us to not only listen to our ideas, but take our ideas, put numbers to them, and then present them out. So it's a whole team effort in trying to get this to move forward. So a little preview of where we are going to go today. I'm going to share with you some vacancy trends and some updates, specifically talking about what we look like as an organization, and then what our trends look like specific to those departmental pay plans that over the past few years you've really looked at and dove in and made some individual adjustments to. We'll also talk about the 2025 proposed compensation plans. I will also have a brief update on the Department of Labor changes that will be effective, the first one July 1st, 2024, and then there's another update on January 1st, 2025. And then finally, we'll wrap things up with the directive that we have been tasked with to look at shift differential. The manager gave us this project and said, let's look at it, let's take a deep dive and kind of dissect how we do it now and how it could be more useful to our organization. So that's kind of our roadmap that we're going to today. If you have questions or comments, please feel free to stop me and ask, and we can work through those as we go forward. So first, I'd like to talk about what our vacancy trends look like. This is something that we're very proud of. If you look at the red line, that is the actual turnover rate. And so that rate is decreasing. I would say, of course, in 2020, 2021, and 2022, those were kind of anomalies because the workforce in itself was unstable, not just with our organization, but across the community as well. But we are trending down. And you'll notice in 2022, that's really when we implemented a lot of the big pay raises. I'll just collectively say that. A lot of adjustments took place. And we can now see in 2023 that that is cycling down. Yes?
The Y scale on the right, it's at 0.14. 0.14 what?
14%.
14%, thank you.
Yes. Yeah. So again, this is just an illustration that, again, we're moving that scale in the right direction. This next slide shows our vacancy rate by specific comp plans. And so here we have our comp plan, AD, which is for our administrative and support positions, the CommCare Direct Services, our Corrections 1, which addresses our corrections workers, Corrections 2 is our ISO, and then EMS, Emergency Communications, Fire, General Pay Plan, and Sheriff. I specifically asked staff to pull out the October 9th, 2022 for CommCare because that was when that plan was implemented. And we know at that time it was a very, very high personnel vacancy time. And so then we looked at a point in time and we just happened to pick April 15th of 2023 and 2024. So what these are showing you is those vacancy rates by those specific plans. One thing I want to point out, if you look at all the vacancies that the departments have been talking to you about, they're looking at their department organizational wide. This is specific to those pay plans that are addressing those positions that have been hard to fill. So again, what we're seeing in this trend is that those numbers are going down. So what we've been doing in the past with the specific pay plans is helping our vacancy rate.
Sheena, can you give some clarity between the difference between corrections 1 and corrections 2?
Yeah, so our corrections 1, okay, so let me start with ComCare. So, and this might help as well. I gave you a handout with all of our pay plans on them. If you turn to the plan that has ComCare support positions, that lists those positions that are on the ComCare, what we call the AD plan.
Okay.
On that page behind it is our direct services, the DS plan. And Commissioner Meissner, same with corrections. It's what we refer to as the corrections worker on scale 1, and the ISOs or the intensive supervision officers for corrections 2.
Okay. Very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. So again, what we're seeing on those point in times is as you have approved those plans, we are hitting those positions that needed to be addressed, and we're seeing those vacancy levels trend down, which is what we want. So what we're going to focus our time on today is our proposed 2025 compensation plans. As a reminder, we have 10 compensation plans that we deal with throughout the county. The first one being the general pay plan, which vast majority of your administrative staff are on. The district attorney pay plan, and I do recognize that there's been other conversations, but today we're just going to talk about what is in the recommended. ComCare and Corrections both have those 2 pay plans that I just referred to. Emergency Communications has their own pay plan. EMS, Fire, and Sheriff, all 3 have a step plan. The manager had asked us to come up with a compensation strategy of how we would address all of these plans, knowing that we had limited resources every year. And so what we have created and fallen into a routine of is moving the scales, and that means moving that entry-level wage for that scale every other year. So we've set up our 10 scales based on an odd or even year. So you might recall last year, we moved the fire step plan, sheriff step plan, and created the emergency communications plan. So we keep those in the even years. The odd years, so for 2025, we're recommending that we move that scale for the general pay plan, the ComCare pay plans, corrections, and the DA pay plan. Now I put an asterisk by the EMS plan and the sheriff plan, and that's because this year we have talked about some different proposals for them in 2025. We'll go into detail on those plans, but I know you're aware of those discussions. So this is what we would hope to keep with in the future, is making sure that every other year we move those beginning wages to help keep us competitive for any new employees. So in 2025, those pay plans that we are recommending the scale movement, and again, that's the beginning wages of these scales, that would affect the general pay plan, the ComCare pay plans, the corrections pay plans, and the DA pay plan. And our recommendation is that employees would receive a 3% general pay adjustment. We would also move that scale 2%. So current employees or incumbent employees would receive a total of 5% January 1, 2025.
But Sheena, the DA has come around and talked to all of us. You're talking 2025, he's talking 2024.
This does not include any of those conversations because none of those have been decided yet through the commission. So this would just be what we are recommending outside of those conversations.
We met with him, Finance, HR, and I met with him a week and a half ago. We're compiling options for you to take a look at as a body to determine if you want to do anything in 2024.
But that'll affect what Sheena's briefing today.
It would not, well, what she's presenting today is distinct from that, because if the commission decides to do anything in 2024, this will be on top of that then. This rolls, the recommendation is this rolls no matter what we do with the DA this year. So it is somewhat different, but you're correct. So if we give him a 1% increase in 2024, the 5% he gets next year would be that much more because you've given him the 1%. That's the relationship.
Thank you.
So, two questions. Number one, a comment and a question. I really like the even year, odd year adjustments. I think that's unique because what I've heard over the last year and a half is that historically we didn't move the scale, right? And I think that fixes that problem. Is this the formula you think? This is the baseline formula 3 and 2. 3% is the COLA adjustments. Maybe I'm not using the right term. And then the 2% would be the even or odd year adjustment. So it'd be every other year they get 5%. 3% one year, every other year they get 5. Is that what you're proposing?
For 2025.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
If there was an option to do more, I think we would push for that as well. But we recognize that there's other requests that are going on, so we think that this is consistent throughout all of the plans.
What is consistent is the even year, odd year thought process. Okay, right, okay.
We went, I forget how many consecutive years between 2010 and 2020 with zero adjustment. And so whether it's every other year, every third year, it has to be addressed. So as Sheena mentioned, this is for 2025 only. I don't know that we're never going to be able to sustain a 5% pay pool. Let's get real. But this is for now, for this budget discussion. I do like the logic that HR wants us to address this every other year. What that number is going to be dependent on what the revenue looks like. So,
Yeah.
Thank you.
And, just as a reminder, it was a 2% that we adjusted scales, for example, in fire in 2024. So staying consistent. The 2025 recommendation for those pay plans with no scale adjustments would include the fire step plan and the emergency communications pay plan. Those employees on the fire step plan would receive their 1-step increase in 2025. That would be effective 1/1, and that would be a 3% step. And then emergency communications would also receive a 3% general pay adjustment. And I will just add as a caveat there, when we reinstated that plan, we made a scale adjustment. I believe it was about 6%, 5%, excuse me. And the incumbents received 6% to adjust for that compression. So that did take place when we reinstated that scale.
So Sheena, the
Yes.
last couple years, so the compression dialogue that we've had and had to address, is compression pretty much solved?
We've
Other-
had
other than what we
pockets
do
that
now.
we've had to address, but more or less the Evergreen did take care of that. But there's been pockets that we've had to go in and examine. Yes.
Thank you.
What we are proposing for the EMS step plan, and again, this would be a change out of cycle, is to change the EMT starting rate to $17.26, which is up from $16.13. If you're wondering, that's approximately 7%. And then we would change our paramedic starting rate to $24.57 from $22.96. Employees would also receive their 1-step increase on 1/1 of 2025. Now, I will say it's not a 7% across the board because we have worked with the department and made some structural adjustments with Chief Lannerman. So I just want to put that out there that it's not completely across the board, that there is some variation between ranks there, but that is in conjunction with working with Chief Lannerman. Any questions on the EMS scale? Okay. On the 2025 Sheriff's Step Plan, as he brought this to you in January of this year, he discussed about bringing another option back to you in the third quarter to discuss a 2% scale adjustment. again, that will come to you in the third quarter for your discussion and approval. The 2025 recommendation, and I believe Lorian and Lindsay have stated this multiple times, that it is built into the forecast, but we anticipate moving that scale 4.65%, and then those individuals on that step plan would receive their step increase effective on their anniversary date, and that step is a 5%. And I think here's probably really what you want to see and look at. So what is this going to cost us in total? And I do have Lorian and Lindsay on standby to talk about the financial numbers. So you can see here, this is how all of those 2025 adjustments break down by the fund. And just for example, in the general fund, we have a differential from the forecast of a little over $600,000 in savings. But I'm going to caveat that with, we have other things that we need to be thinking about, and not just what can we do with that money. In a second, I'm going to talk about what those Department of Labor changes look like for us, and how we're going to anticipate putting some money back in contingency for that. But overall, what we are projecting, and just went through, we can afford for 2025. And I don't know if Lindsay or Lorian want to elaborate.
Did you say can or can't?
Can. Yes, it doesn't include the sheriff's step.
I'll put a caveat to that. We can afford it depending on how we deal with the 13 or 14 million dollars worth of decision packages you all saw. So it comes down, that's why I wanted to put a caveat.
And the $4.9 million structural balance that we still have yet to find a solution for. I know, but this is within the 5% pool in the commission. I still believe this is a priority, because we have committed to employees to try and do more with compensation, and I don't think the commission wants to destroy that goodwill that's been generated in that reduction in turnover that we've seen. So even from a financial perspective, even though it's very expensive, I still think it continues to be the priority we've heard from you all to try and at least sustain as much of this as we can.
And just to make sure you understand, this includes the 5% sheriff's employees receive on their anniversary. It does not include scale movement for the sheriff.
Now, I want to agree with Lindsay. We will put you through a prioritization discussion next Tuesday. So if this is a priority, you'll publicly have an opportunity to weigh in on this. But I do agree that this, we heard you say staffing stability is priority. That's where this comes from. So.
So it's $1,920,000 extra in addition.
It is, if you look at that bottom line, the 920,000, that is the total amount of, I guess, less expense from what has been presented today thus far versus what's in your forecast. That does not mean that HR will not have other things to talk to you about. Like she mentioned, the Department of Labor is rolling out new FLSA standards that are going to have a cost to it. I think that's still being worked through. If there's still priorities you all have talked about that you want to address, holiday pay, weekend pay, some of those things, that's not touched through here. So I think there's still discussion to be had. So I just don't want us to get too excited about that $920,000.
And I'd also add that you went through the decision package. You saw many decision packages that were compensation related. That does not include any of that, including the DAs.
And then, of course, some of those numbers are in red. And so that's another thing that we need to consider. Those are grants. If we make these adjustments, where is that going to be covered from? So typically those come out of the general fund. But what we're presenting, like I said, it's doable. It's one of many things that is being asked for. I probably have the biggest decision package, if you will, to keep compensation moving. So this is our other concern when we talk about that. Not only is it pay adjustments, but now the Department of Labor just a few weeks ago came out with an update, and basically it is to increase that overtime threshold. That came out on April 24th. And that's raising that from $35,568 to $43,888 effective July 1st, 2024. So again, those are rules that we have to abide by. Bethany has done some preliminary work, and we have identified approximately 6 positions. 3 of those are currently filled that it will affect July 1st. So we anticipate a very minimal impact on this first round of it. The second increase will take place on January 1st, 2025, and that will move up from the $43,888 to $58,656. Right now, we've identified approximately 125 positions that this will affect. So again, that is taking our top priority. As we say in compensation, we kind of have to be very flexible with what we get. This has been rolled into our plate, and now it's moved to the top priority to figure out how it's going to affect those positions and what amount of money we have to put back in contingency. So we'll have to work in conjunction with finance on any of those savings that we have. We are, again, currently working through that review of that, and we will be working with Nicole and her team on a communication plan because, again, affecting at least 125 positions in January, we need to have that rolled out in a way to communicate that to departments and employees. Any questions about the DOL's update? We do not know what that financial impact will be. About 200? Maybe about 200,000 then. Very rough. We'll get closer to that. Yeah.
And just to clarify, this forces employees now who are making less than that to go to hourly status. So we're having to now anticipate potential additional overtime costs because those employees today don't get overtime, right?
That's correct.
Which is interesting. We went through this in 2017, 2018, between Obama and Trump. So they're looking only at salary. They're not looking at job description or what they do, whether they supervise or not. It is strictly just a quantitative, if you're making this much money, you got to go to hourly.
And I believe that's historically how the organization has implemented these changes. And then, of course, we're putting a strong push on departments. If your job description changes, they need to notify compensation and classification to get those updates. So if we need to change something, we can at least have something to look at and compare it to. Because it's really about the duties test. There's a salaries test. I mean, it's more than just dollars or more than just a title. Okay. I'm going to have Anna come up and talk about our proposal to shift differential.
So as Sheena said at the beginning, this was a conversation that the manager started. Currently, shift differential is handled in a pretty confusing manner. So employees are paid shift differential. Currently, it's $1. It increased from 75 cents to $1 recently. But employees that are occupying eligible job classifications within departments that need essentially evening and overnight work. So that's courthouse police, facilities, emergency communications, EMS, corrections, CompCare, and the sheriff. Those employees receive it as part of their base pay if they're assigned to second or third shift. That means it's paid out for all hours paid. That means that those employees receive that shift differential if they're on vacation, if they're sick, on any types of other paid leave. And then employees that are assigned to first shift, if they happen to work 5 or more consecutive hours between 2 p.m. and 8 a.m., then they receive that shift differential for all hours worked. It's very confusing. And then you also have the issue of some employees receiving that additional pay for hours that they are not working when their counterparts are not. And that kind of creates an equity issue within those departments. But it's also an administrative burden on those departments, payroll, and human resources. So we engaged in conversations with those departments and Donna Howerton, our payroll manager, and talked about what the ideal solution would be to improve that for the county, but also with the goal of being able to modify some rates. As you heard from a lot of departments, including Joan Tammany for CompCare, one of the issues they have is staffing crisis. and those overnight shifts are a real struggle for them. So what we're recommending is to shift to paying for only actual hours worked between a shift window of 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. But that will allow us to then become more competitive in our rates. So for EMS and CommCare, our recommendation is $3 an hour. They're competing with the hospitals. And just as an example, Wesley, the last updates that we had, their shift differential was anywhere from $2 to $3, depending on what hours they were working and if it was weekends. And corrections, emergency communications, facilities, and courthouse police, they will go to $1.50. And then the sheriff will stay $1. That is comparable to his counterparts, including the city. The estimated cost of this increase is $138,000, which in the grand scheme of how much we are increasing for all of our departments, but now taking out of base pay, that really means that we are targeting those employees that are truly working those hours that are not ideal, that are hard to recruit for, but at a minimal cost to the county, and making it much easier to administrate.
Question.
Yes.
So let's just take emergency communicate. That's 911, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what their shifts are, but if their shift is from 2 in the afternoon to 10 o'clock at night, they would get this on the hours after 6 o'clock.
Yes. So if they worked till 10 p.m., they would receive an additional $1.50 an hour for the 4 hours, so 6 to 10 p.m.
Okay.
I like that, but there's probably some savings. I didn't mean to interrupt. A little bit of savings from your old plan to this one, but the net impact is $138,000.
This really allowed us to increase those rates.
Right. Okay. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I don't have a problem with shift differential. The only thing bothers me a little bit is that we're valuing certain departments working late over other departments working late. Is that really fair where we're saying that it's more important for us to pay EMS and CommCare $3 than it is the sheriff deputy for $1 an hour?
It's really based on the market and who we're competing for those employees. CommCare and EMS, we're competing with the hospitals for staffing those shifts. And the payouts, I give you one example. We have also heard of hospitals giving employees $500 additional on their paycheck to work those night shifts. And so if we want to continue staffing, this is a huge piece of compensation for covering those 24/7 facilities and programs.
Okay, well, it's just a fairness issue in my mind. If you're working shift, you need to get some additional pay because that's not desirable. But
And it can,
I have a hard time saying that one of them is more important.
It's a similar
3 times
philosophy.
as much.
It's a similar philosophy of now that we've had to move from just the general pay plan to several different pay plans. We have had to change from keeping everyone the same to going by market. And that's what the labor force is requiring for us to compete for employees.
Anna, can you talk a little bit about the process that you used to get to this?
So we met with every department head from these departments to discuss this, and it was unanimous for the group, and everyone agreed. I think the sheriff was the biggest proponent for EMS and CommCare increasing the rate to $3. Everyone understood who they were competing with.
Not about valuing more one than the other. It's being able to put bodies in those positions based on the market they're competing against. It's really not about equity. It's about demand and supply and demand.
And I would agree that the demand for off-hour mental health services just skyrockets. The community's demanding it, and folks have choices, and they don't want to work those shifts because that's when they connect with their families and that sort of thing. So we've got to do something different to be able to fill those shifts.
I do appreciate your.
Thank you, Anna.
Well, and with that, I just want to wrap up a few things. We know that there's many other compensation issues out there that we would like to address. We're very cognizant of how much money we're able to spend on some of those things. So they are on our radar. Things like the holiday pay, the weekend pay, bilingual pay, things of that nature. We have not forgot about that, but it's just a matter of juggling what those top priorities are. And again, the one that we were not anticipating was the update from the Department of Labor. So again, we need to make sure that that's our top priority when we move forward with compensation. But I would value any feedback you might give us, any direction you might give us at this time.
For me personally, I think it'd be helpful to be able to summarize some of those decision packages that had compensation requests. If we can get that in some sort of document with this, so that we can see it all encompassing, a comprehensive look at what the compensation pieces are going to be. I think that would be helpful. I would also make a suggestion for me, and I'm not speaking for the other commissioners, but in the future, I would like to have this conversation before the decision packages. I think that would be helpful for me to understand if compensation and staffing stability is the number one priority. I would like to entertain this conversation before I even consider decision packages, so I have a frame of mind of what could or couldn't be possible. Now I have to go back now and consider all those decision packages with a new frame of mind.
100% agree. As I mentioned during the decision or during the budget presentations, we're in a bad habit here of seeing compensation packages creep into decision packages discussion. It's independent conversations, whether it comes before or after decision packages, will the commission there. But I do agree they need to be separated, and we need to have this discussion distinct from that, because it makes it hard to track and follow, and it makes it hard for you guys. But I 100% agree with where you're at on it.
Sheena, can you go back to your slide 4? This gives us a sense of accomplishment, I would think.
Is this the one you're referring to, Commissioner?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, corrections is still, corrections
No.
1 is the highest vacancy.
Remember what Steve said in his presentation. He staffs for his needs. So he doesn't bring on extra staff if there are not individuals or clients that he needs to take care of. So as he said, he is staffed adequately right now, but these numbers would reflect those positions, and he's not overstaffing at this point.
So those are the approved positions in the budget.
Yes.
But thank you for reminding me. I forgot that he had said that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just qualify on corrections. The corrections 1 is the corrections officers. And the one place that they're still short on staffing is at the adult res work release. They've had, supervision has been a problem because they had so much loss a couple of years ago to where they lost a lot of senior people to state jobs and other jobs.
Right.
So they've got a very young workforce, and getting people to the level of supervision has been a problem. And then they still have some correction officer turnover. And then they've seen that the state is getting 5%.
Well, that was my question: is do we know what the state's going to do in July?
And so there's been some chatter from down there about the fact that the state's getting another 5% in July. And so, but right now, he is staffing to his needs. But on the adult side, he has some shortages that he still needs to catch up on. Just for clarity.
We've had a lot of conversation. I think I might have mentioned this already, but corrections main competitor, if you will, is the state of Kansas.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we run on opposing fiscal years. So one thing that we need to consider in the future is giving the corrections workers their compensation adjust on July 1. We're in this awkward situation now where they have to wait. State moves up 5%. We have to wait 6 months to get our people moved up a comparable rate. We'll look at that in the future. We don't want to necessarily tinker with that this year because we're going to try to shift it into this new shift differential model. But when that's done, I think we have to take a look at corrections and compensate them at a timely fashion that the state does. A little bit weird for the county, but I think we can do it.
Then my other observation is the obviously emergency communications. Isn't that a celebration in a way?
Well, there's a lot of celebration. I mean, across from top to bottom.
I agree.
We haven't seen, I don't think there's any bad trends.
Well, and Anna's going to explain the ComCare number as well.
When
Well-
Packer might disagree.
Well, in ComCare, it's hard to show, but they would actually show even greater progress in the numbers. But their achievement and staffing has been so great. A lot of positions were held when we first created there. It was 90 some positions, and they have unheld a significant portion of those, and that's why their vacancy numbers look as they do, or it's not as steep of drop, is because as they've filled, they have unheld, and so it's just kind of remained steady as they're unholding those positions to fill.
Good observation.
And that
Yeah,
was a
is there-
good strategy with ComCare to hold those positions at that time, and it's worked very well.
Is there a key or a guide of some sort, or dictionary even, on these general pay plan classifications, these grades? So, I mean, I look at it and I don't know what the difference between a 50 and a 59 is. Is there some sort of guide that you guys have that you'd be willing to share with us?
So we have resources on Eline, but we can point those to you. Yes.
Okay. Helpful, thanks.
But do you think, you talked about working with communications with Nicole's group about whatever. Do you think the feeling from the HR perspective is that the employees in general have a realization of the large improvement we've made in the last year or two? Think there's any sympathy to allow us to maybe breathe a little bit for, not to pause, but
Yeah,
just.
we are very excited to share with you some of the information that we received from our employee engagement survey that's coming on Tuesday, so stay tuned. But just a little preview, that was one question we asked, was how the employees perceive our commitment, meaning leadership and the commission's commitment to increasing the compensation across the organization. And overwhelming, I believe it was about 75%, if not a little bit higher, of employees do believe in that commitment, and they've seen it in progress. So yes, I think employees do see it and feel it.
Thank you, Chairman. So just on that slide right there, I do see there's a, different plans listed there on the chart, but the chart, the slide is titled vacancy rate by comp plan. I'm just curious, we may not have had a plan specifically for some of those down below, which is why I guess there's dashes in those boxes.
Yeah, we just pulled ComCare for that specific date.
Do we still find out what the vacancy rates were for those departments?
Sure,
And see how
absolutely.
it's changed?
Bethany pulled that later on, yep.
That'd be great. And then I understand, I see I understand the point that Commissioner Dennis was making regarding the, for example, a courthouse police is making $1.50 for a night shift, and a sheriff's officer is making $1. So I think that they're similar. Someone in corrections is making $1.50, and sheriff's making $1. So I do see on that shift differential pay. I am concerned a little bit about that. I am just curious, especially for the EMS and ComCare. So let's say you have a new person coming into EMS, and they're working nights, because a lot of times new people end up on night shift. I'm sure that's probably true. And they're making $3 on shift differential. They may be making more per hour than someone who's been there for a couple of years. And so I don't want that argument coming back to us later on and saying, we feel like this is not fair because the guy on day shift's making less than the guy on night shift, even though the guy on day shift has been there for a couple of years.
So, I think that people who were involved in these meetings would attest to, I think the departments understood that, but we're very much in favor of providing something higher specifically for EMS and ComCare because of the struggles that they're having to cover those shifts at night. And they wanted that number up.
I'm not sure this would be, you probably wouldn't like to even think about this, but it would be nice if this was formulaic. I mean, I worked shift work most of my entire career. I was in the military, I worked second, third shift almost the entire time. And in the aircraft industry, I worked second, third shift more than half the years I was involved in that. So I probably have 15 to 18 years probably doing second or third shift work. I was never asked, the only way I could have that job is if I was willing to work those hours. And I thought it was gracious that they gave me shift differential. They didn't have to do that. But what I'm wondering is if this could be formulaic. In other words, if you're having trouble filling positions, I could see that number going up. If there's not been trouble, there's not vacancies in those positions, that maybe the number doesn't need to be quite as high. So if it's formulaic based on difficulty for filling those positions, I can see the number might need to be higher to lure them in, but it doesn't necessarily need to be a static number. I think this being static the way it is, as is proposed today, I think it's going to be a problem down the road. But it may not be necessary, and it's also by some people will be considered unfair. So I'm not sure this is exactly the right plan. But
But
Get to that, if that's okay. When I worked at the hospital, I worked third shift, and I made more money than people coming in at first shift, and we all knew it. But people in first shift did not want to work night shift, and I knew that I would love to go to first shift, but I knew I needed the extra money to work third shift. If that makes sense. So I think it's in the medical world, this is very common. I mean, this is what you expect if you're going to work second and third shift. And if we want to keep people here, that's going to be the expectation, because they can go to the hospitals and do this work, and they'll get that if they're working that second or third shift. I mean, that's very common. When I started here, I was actually surprised at how little we were paying for medical second and third shift.
I ask another question. Can we, even though they may be the same rate, EMS is not tied to ComCare. If you needed to change EMS differently than ComCare, I don't know if the ComCare have the same lure to the hospitals that EMS would have, for example, to that argument. So they may both be $3, but I'm not so sure that'll be tied together, saying if you increase one or decrease one, that you have to do that to the other. There may be different rates necessary for each of the two different types of jobs, if you will. Mm-hmm. And same thing with the corrections, emergency communications facilities, and courthouse police. I see those, maybe they're all the same as proposed, but you might need to tweak 911 differently than you would have to tweak facilities, for example. I don't know that it ought to be necessarily tied together in policy, if that makes any sense.
Yes, yeah, it does.
And again, I think you ought to be willing to make a change every, maybe on a yearly basis, say we're not having as much trouble in one area as we are another. Let me give you one example. I think that the jail has always been a hard position to fill. And if I was in law enforcement, I would probably rather be a patrol deputy than I would rather than being a jail detention officer. So to me, I think there may be some reasons to treat these as independent things and maybe adjust them on a yearly basis. And then finally, I had one other question here. I'll get back to it. Thank you.
Any other questions? Well, I appreciate all the work that's gone into this, yeah.
Last one related to others and what Commissioner Dennis had said. So just for my knowledge, so for instance, when you have snow removal, they get compensated overnight stuff on that. Is that already built in?
We have created an adjustment for snow removal specifically.
that.
It is not in shift differential.
Okay.
But
Well,
yeah, we have worked with Lynn to address when that happens.
Okay. Because these are the bullets are the. God, I hate to use
These
the
are
word
the
vital, but they're
positions.
very-
I'm sorry, the departments that have positions where they are shift eligible. Yeah.
So along the same line, like when we had a tornado go through here a couple years ago, I went out and we had people all night working from emergency communication, emergency management, and so forth. Do they pick it up too when they work like that?
Not shift differential, no.
Kind of emergency fund or something? No.
So we have options put in place where if we did have an emergency or critical incident, that the manager could authorize additional pay. This is built into the for the shift eligible positions. It may be built into their base pay.
Okay.
Thank you, Sherman. My other question is, are these the only departments that are eligible then for shift differential?
Yes, but not every position in these departments is shift eligible.
Okay. So let's be clear that fire is not part of this.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Other questions? A lot of work that's gone into this. I appreciate it. When is the other? What is next in the budget hearing conversation in regards to compensation? Is it next week we're doing the kind of plug and play?
So Tuesday, Sheena will give you, or Anna, I'm not sure whom, will give you the update on that employee engagement survey
Okay.
during your staff meeting. We also have time blocked then because we moved your CIP discussion to tomorrow. You'll have a chance to talk about your prioritization of everything you've heard. You will have heard a lot about new CIP that will be costly. You will have heard compensation. You will have heard all of the decision packages, all of the base requests. And this is when the rubber is really going to meet the road. And we're going to start talking about what are your expectations for the manager's recommended budget? What do you want to see in terms of deficit solution? What do you want to see in terms of property tax rate? What do you want to see in terms of compensation or decision packages? What do you want to see if there are reductions, again, as a part of that deficit solution? And then we will have a drop dead date of June 17th for decisions that go in the manager's recommended budget. So like we have done in the past, we'll have conversations with you about what that is. Of course, we're hoping that you'll be informed by your budget roundtables that are coming up. That's a new part of the process. So even though we'll want to start hearing your priorities, we'll also, I think, want to collect the feedback and what you hear from the public on what they see as priorities and core services. And so there's going to be a lot of, I think, discussion over the next 4, 5, 6 weeks about what's going to go in that recommended. So right now we're just in the discussion and analysis mode, and if there's things you've heard where you don't feel like you have enough information, we would love to know that so we can either put together workshops or do issue papers for you. That's kind of where we are. We're going to do all this dump of data on you. Also, in the midst of this, you're going to be talking about the next 3 to 5 year commitment on health insurance. So you'll have a workshop on that on the 21st. So lots of good fun to look forward to.
Can I ask, Lindsay, you know, in the budget book, you gave us a nice calendar, but you just threw out some dates that June 17th, for instance.
That's a drop dead day for the manager to make decisions on what goes in the recommended
we update
budget.
those calendars just because we've got.
Right, that's not
Right.
necessarily a
Right.
you guys date, that's a us date as staff
Okay.
to know what we have to have.
it's a
So we'll
goal,
talk
tentative.
with you,
Or maybe we can say tentative. I do like when you do have the one-on-ones with us.
and that'll happen just before that June 17th date. And that'll be after we've heard a lot of feedback from you and try to come figure out what we think we've heard where there's consensus on to come up with the best possible recommended budget, knowing it's not going to be
Sounds
perfect
like
for
fun.
any one of you.
Well, I like the systematic shift, not shift differential. I do like this, but the systematic sliding of the scale where it's routine. I think that's necessary, and I really like how you're doing that every other year. I think that's important. And I think, coming from someone who's had to employ a lot of people in the state, when people know how they're paid and they can project and they can forecast, it does a lot for morale. When they don't know how they're paid and they can't forecast and they can't, it really impacts morale. So I think being able to communicate to the staff that there is a system, there's a structure, there's a long-term plan and forecast, although it's going to shift from time to time, but the awareness of the every other year need to shift the scale, I think, is really, really helpful for people and their families. So you did a lot of good work. Thank you.
Well, we appreciate your time. We'll give you back an hour of your day. I know you're super busy, but this isn't our last conversation. So again, just reiterating, we know that there's other things that will come up, and we'll talk through those as we
Very good.
get time. So thank you.
One
Appreciate
other
it.
quick thing. All the time we keep talking about how that we've improved, and we've had numbers over the years of $30-40 million increase in the last X number of years. Can you kind of quantify that in some kind of document so that we can see, we can say over so many years we've had this size of an increase? Thank you.
Tom? We're done an hour early.
Just didn't know how many questions you'd have.
Impressive. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.